Hello and welcome to WooStream, bringing Willamette to you. My name is Tiffany Newton, and I'm the Director of Graduate Alumni Engagement here at Willamette. Today's conversation features Sandi Collins Hildreth, class of 1993, who serves as the Global Human Resources Director for Wieden+Kennedy, the world's largest remaining independent advertising agency, with over 1,500 employees in offices from Portland to Shanghai. In this role, she manages a global team of advertising experts and support staff, while also doing her best to foster a company culture that prides itself on a lack of corporateness. Sandi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me about all of the work that goes into managing and supporting your colleagues as they adjust to this new reality.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're delighted. So many people are facing a new reality when it comes to work, whether they've lost a job, are trying to work at home with other family members in the same space, or are rapidly adapting to new technologies. How has your own job been impacted?
Well, to be honest, my job has actually changed very little, other than now I'm doing it in pajamas and sweats. Although today I am wearing my Willamette t-shirt specifically for this podcast.
Yay!
But since I work with all 8 of our offices over 6 countries, my job is already heavily video-based. But what I would say is that our employees have really adapted very quickly to having a video-based work. And as a creative company, our employees have gotten really creative with some of their virtual backgrounds. It's pretty funny. Some of our departments and our groups have even been doing themed meetings, as well as hosting happy hours, Zoom karaoke, and some Netflix parties. But there's definitely been an impact to our employees, particularly those who live alone, those who are far away from their families, living in other countries, and then very much so for our parents who are having to juggle the parenting and the homeschooling and their work responsibilities all at the same time.
I'm hoping you can speak a little bit more about how COVID-19 is impacting the business of Wieden+Kennedy and the labor market a little bit in general.
Sure. Yeah, it's really hard to find an industry this hasn't affected. Wieden+Kennedy is part of the professional services industry. So beyond the expected disruption to our office environment, when our clients are impacted, it absolutely affects us in both direct and indirect ways. But what I think this pandemic has what it's done is it's really shown a spotlight on how heavily service-oriented the world is, and also how or if those companies can adapt. Right now, Wieden+Kennedy, we continue to provide our clients with creative services to help these business problems during this time. And we're doing it all while we're working at home, and we're still creating a lot of work for our clients.
So what role, to kind of dive in a little bit more, what role do human resource managers play in helping companies and employees navigate these challenges and maintain productivity in the midst of a pandemic that requires social distancing to ensure public safety?
Right. Well, I can only speak for my company. But for us, HR has played a really important role during this time. And as I mentioned earlier, technology is not an issue for my company, and we don't need to focus on how to keep all of our employees productive. They love what they do, almost to a fault. So, we don't need to worry about that. They're definitely working, and we don't need to monitor any productivity. So our HR concerns have been more around how do we make sure our employees don't burn out and work too much? Because, I think we're all experiencing this work from home is blurring lines between any kind of a work-life balance. I don't know for you, but like we're starting week 5 of this at Wieden. So it's been a little bit of a journey. So initially, before we went on a work from home, we were continuing to shift in how do we keep our employees healthy? How do we keep our employees healthy if an employee tests positive or if an employee is exposed to the virus? And we made a really proactive call that all of our offices went to a work from home protocol prior to the states and the countries requiring it. And even before that, we asked all of our offices to do a 1-day work from home stress test to make sure we knew that it could work. And now that we're in the middle of work from home, then we've shifted our focus again to keeping our employees sane and healthy, sanity being the key. So we've been pulling together lots of resources for our parents to keep both themselves and their children happy and occupied. We're trying to provide ways to keep them physically healthy by providing live workout classes through Zoom and other online programs. And then, of course, the most important thing, maintaining their mental health with mindfulness, meditation classes, asking people to take periodic vacation days, and also providing additional access to online counseling. And then, of course, on top of all of this, we've been working with our office leaders and our finance to make sure that we're going to stay financially healthy during this time. So, and I'm sure that this is exactly the same protocol every other business is going through right now, but we're cutting non-essential expenses, and then, doing that proactive, scenario planning of how this is going to affect our workforce. So, we're thinking of all kinds of different things, including work share programs, furloughs, pay reductions, and then, of course, worst case scenarios, layoffs. And that's not to say that that's going to happen, but we still need to be proactive about these things. These are just some of the ways that we can protect our employees and the agency in both the short and the long term. And then, of course, we have the other thing that we need to be thinking about, which is how do we bring people back to work? How do we reopen our offices and keep our employees safe and healthy when they do come back?
Yeah, there's so many levels and layers there, whether it's trying to maintain the health of the people that you're working with or the health of the company. And then, what do you do immediately? What do you do kind of in the middle? And then what does this look like moving forward? So thank you for diving into some of those different pieces. I know that human resource professionals are often tasked with developing very creative solutions to problems that center around work, and you shared some of them, but I'm wondering if there are other responses that you've seen within your company or with colleagues across the field that you also want to highlight.
Sure. At Wieden+Kennedy, we always put a focus on our employees first. And because of that, we have a lot of flexibility on how we modify, change plans during any time, but particularly during situations like this, on ways that can most help our employees. So, for example, one of when these breakouts started happening outside of China, I immediately asked all of our offices to set aside their sick leave policies, because it just seemed like that was one very simple way that we could be making our employees' lives easier rather than harder. And then, again, like going back to the work-life balance that work from home blurs, we've just been really trying hard to set boundaries for our employees, and letting them, make those decisions. It's okay to move meetings because you've got to accommodate homeschooling or naps or, making sure that you can only have meetings during a specific time, putting in a lunch hour, making sure that you're not working through your weekends. And while it seems counterintuitive, asking people to take vacation days. And our leadership teams around the network have been really great about this and communicating it, because we feel that communication and transparency makes all the difference in situations like this.
Well, and it just shows a very human first approach, which is, wonderful. And I'm sure your employees and everyone you're working with appreciate as well, as they're all juggling so much. So you've shared that you had worked with Wieden+Kennedy for over 26 years. And that perspective, that longevity gives you a unique look at, what resiliency and success can look like. Looking at previous employment crises like the Great Recession, do you have any takeaways that can help people now, or anything that kind of informs that?
It's really hard to compare this to the last recession because, this is a global health crisis that's forced an economic downturn. Never could I have foreseen that all 8 of our offices would be working at home at the same time due to a global pandemic? So this is just unprecedented in my mind. And I also can't sugarcoat what's happening in the world right now. But I'm still trying to remain some optimism. So we do have an office in China, in Shanghai, and so we've been on the front lines with our Shanghai office since the early part of the year, because obviously that's where this started. So our Shanghai office did a slow return to work over the month of March, and then has gone to fully back into the office as of this Monday. So and so it's really been interesting to see what's been happening in China. So right now, I would say 95% of China is back to normal. The restaurants are open, the malls are open, the gyms are open. There's just different protocols put in place. So it's mandatory. Everybody wears a mask. You have to queue up in lines to get into office buildings. You have to have your temperature checked, wash your hands before you can enter any of these buildings. So I've been actively looking towards what's happening in China as an indicator of what might be next for the rest of the world. Having said all this, I do not think the U.S. will be going back to work in May. I think that seems premature. And even when the states do lift these home orders, I just have to keep asking, how do we prevent additional flare-ups or breakouts before there's a vaccine? So these are the things I think about all the time when in terms of, how do I keep my employees safe when we do decide to reopen the office?
And it's so interesting seeing how that is working in different parts of the world who maybe have different work cultures or have taken a slightly different approach than what we have, and just knowing that there are so many unknowns at the moment that we just have to keep kind of paying attention to and do the best that we can. Thinking of that, I'm sure you've seen some other examples of resiliency and positivity from individuals and companies, and I'd love to have you speak on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, there's so many negative things, that we could be focusing on right now. And sometimes I think it's often hard to see the positive, but there are so many positive things that are happening in the world right now. And it's so amazing to see the world coming together and people helping each other. I've been really impressed with companies that have shifted from manufacturing their own products to making critical equipment, particularly for our essential healthcare workers. And then states such as Oregon sending, much needed medical equipment such as ventilators, most recently to the state of New York. And then, there's been all these different stories about high schoolers and college students and schools and universities that are coming up with really creative ways to help, whether that's through their using 3D printers or other equipment. In fact, just a couple days ago, I read about the Willamette chemistry professors that were making hand sanitizer with the local distillery, which I thought was just so awesome. And then there's also other things like there's restaurant owners who are making food for hospital workers, and even my own agency who partnered with Governor Brown to create the Stay Home Save Lives campaign for the state of Oregon. So there's a lot of positive things to be looking at right now during this time. And then from an economic standpoint, I am just amazed at the resiliency of some of these very small companies that have had to completely adapt to this new normal that we're living in. I read a quote yesterday that I really liked, and it said, "If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less." So now is the time for all of us to adapt and be open to that change. And, in the HR field, there's a phrase, the future of work, that's talked about often. And I think this pandemic has pushed all companies to be adapting to ways of working that they didn't think possible. I'm a huge proponent of work flexibility. And so now I can truly say work from home can and does work. So I think that is also a silver lining that's come out of this. And then to further, just thinking about that further, what does that mean down the road? What does that mean for companies that have really large building footprints? Does this make them want to think differently about where is their staff located? How big should their buildings be? I know those are things that we'll be thinking about. What does this mean for remote workforces? So I do think there's going to be a lot of learnings that come out of this situation.
So you mentioned the future of work, which is, on everyone's mind right now. And I was wondering, what advice do you have for new graduates who are just about to enter the job market, or for someone who is now facing a career disruption?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer right now. When unemployment claims have just hit over 16 million. So, while it seems difficult to see right now, this will eventually pass. It may take longer than currently predicted. So realistically, you may not be able to work in your dream job right away. So I guess my advice would be twofold. One is research companies that you feel have fared the best during this time, and maybe focus your efforts there. But then secondly, be open to things that you may not have considered before. Experience comes from unexpected places. And while you may not be able to jump right into the field you're most passionate about, you might find a lot of value and gain professional experience in a field that you had never thought about, or from volunteering or working a second job just to pay the bills until you can find, that dream job later.
And it's so, I think it's relevant for so many of us that you may not know exactly all of the transferable skills you may be getting in this specific role, but they're there and they will be things that you draw on later in your professional career.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So since this is your area, where do you go to find reliable and current information on human resources or on employment trends, that kind of thing?
Sure. So, one of my go-tos is the Society for Human Resources Management, or SHRM is the acronym in the industry. Another really good website, just because I have a global HR purview, is a site called World at Work, which is more kind of globally based. And then, of course, especially during these times, I've been really paying attention to the state employment websites, because there have been a lot of new laws enacted. Obviously, the federal, there's been some new federal laws that have been enacted recently. So the state sites are really good and have a lot of information. NPR, CDC, World Health Organization, and then Harvard Business Review. It seems weird to be talking about another university on this podcast, but the Harvard Business Review, it does a really good job. First of all, they just put out really amazing articles. But I think right now, all of their coronavirus related articles are free during this time, and they've put out some really, really great information. And then this is probably a little more advertising industry related, but Scott Galloway, who is a professor of marketing at NYU, he has a really good blog and Twitter feed that we get a lot of interesting economic information from.
Well, and thank you for sharing that. We're fortunate that so many companies and sources of information are, lowering paywalls right now and helping folks access this information and really doing a good service to help people navigate things. I know you have talked so much about how you're focusing on your employees, and I'm wondering if there are any employee-specific or individual-specific resources people should be taking advantage of.
Yeah, we did put a lot of information together for our employees, and unfortunately I don't have that information readily available to share. But I do have, two things that I think that would be of interest. One is there is a new site that just came out, which is a coronavirus symptoms site, and I think there's probably some other ones out like this, but State of Oregon just put their own out, and that website is c19oregon.com. So if anybody at home is experiencing symptoms, please start there and check your symptoms. And then I think this is such a strange time, and people are just feeling so many different things right now. There was an article that really hit me, again, from the Harvard Business Review. And the article is called That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief. And I would encourage everyone to read it right now, because I think everyone will experience or feel something from that article. So I highly recommend that. And then, if you're a business owner or in the human resources, again, really be looking at your state sites on programs that can be helping you, whether you're a small business owner or if you're trying to figure out how to keep your employees employed during this time. What are some of the alternatives? There's some really amazing information on the state sites.
Well, and it's so good for people to check in with their local experts and to get information to help them navigate, like you said, the CARES Act programs that are coming out now and all of that. So thank you for sharing that. And we all need to also check in with ourselves emotionally and make sure that we're doing okay. And so thank you for sharing that article as well. So now we're going to pivot just a little bit over to, you're talking about your Willamette t-shirt. We're so excited that, you're representing. If I may ask, what made you choose Willamette when you did?
Oh, gosh. Well, I grew up in Silverton, which is a rural town very close to Salem. And I'm the first person in my family to attend college. So I honestly didn't know much about Willamette, but I had a friend who I very much admired, who was already going there and encouraged me to apply. So, I actually applied without even visiting, which is so odd because I lived so close to the school. And at the time, it didn't seem strange that I hadn't visited. But now that I've gone through this process and going on college visits with my daughter, who's a senior in high school right now, it seems truly unbelievable to me that I did that. But I would say it's probably the best sight unseen decision I've ever made.
And it's so interesting because Silverton, we do field trips out there and stuff because of the waterfalls in that area, and it's so lovely. So now that you're further into an established career, looking back, what did Willamette provide for you that you didn't anticipate but are thankful for?
Well, I naively knew nothing about a liberal arts education when I applied to Willamette, but am still so grateful for it. I was a double major in business economics and Spanish. And I was able to take so many other interesting classes to really round out my education, as well as spending a semester abroad in Spain my junior year. So, my first 10 years at Wieden, I worked in our finance department. And so my business economics degree really came in handy. And I think actually my first year at Wieden, I even translated one of our ads into Spanish. So I was able to, I can actually say I used my Spanish degree once. But now that I'm in a global role where I get to travel to all of our offices, I'm always remain so fortunate to have had that study abroad experience, because it really prepared me to have a much broader worldview. I'm so grateful to my time at Willamette. And then, outside of my career and just on a personal level, I met my very best friends at Willamette, who I still talk to on a daily basis, and also my husband, who I also still talk to on a daily basis. At least I think he's still talking to me during this coronavirus situation.
Closeness, yeah.
Exactly. So, so I loved my time at Willamette. Yeah, it was just really wonderful.
That's wonderful to hear. And it's interesting how, again, that adaptability and, learning things, but maybe not knowing exactly how you're going to implement them kind of carries forward with you, and you find something that you can do with that. At this time, really, I'm just going to ask if there's anything else that you'd like to share with our audience, or that we maybe didn't discuss earlier.
No, obviously this is such an interesting time in the world. So, I guess what I would end with is, if you're an essential employee, thank you so much for everything you're doing right now during this time. And if you're not, please continue to stay home, to continue to flatten the curve to save lives. And then the other thing I would say is like, just really virtually check in with your friends and your loved ones during this time. Find ways to stay connected. I think most people are already figuring this out, either through, Zoom happy hours. There's a new site I just heard about called House Party, where you can play virtual games, Netflix parties. And then just more than anything, just be kind to yourself, trying to juggle work and life right now, because what we're going through right now, it's not normal, and we can't be putting that normal lens on what we're doing. So just be kind to yourself.
Such good words, and really ties into our motto and kind of how Willamette sees things. So Sandi, thank you so very much for sharing your insights and knowledges about the way companies and employees can support each other in these turbulent times. We also appreciate the examples and resources you shared to assist members of our Willamette community as they navigate their own professional setbacks and successes. If you enjoyed this interview and would like to see more interviews as well as other exciting Willamette content, continue to tune into WooStream, our virtual programming platform. We hope you are staying safe and healthy. And if you need more information on Willamette's response to COVID-19, please check out the links in the description box or at Willamette EDU. And again, we also encourage you to check out the Oregon site, which we will post in the description box as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.